Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Debbie Wolfenbarger, and I'm a technology transfer JPL and JPL's representative on NASA's Technology Transfer Management team. I will be your host for this NASA Technology Transfer Program webinar on the JPL-developed Vital Ventilator. Our presenter today is Dr. Leon Alkalai. Leon is a JPL Fellow in 2014 and a full member of the International Academy of Astronautics since 2005. He is currently the project manager of the Vital COVID-19 Ventilator Project at JPL and the manager of the JPL Office of Strategic Partnerships, responsible for developing strategic domestic and international partnerships for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Leon received his PhD in 1989 from UCLA and has been at JPL ever since. During his 31-year career at JPL, Leon has held numerous leadership positions in technology development, program development, business capture, and strategic planning. Leon received 2 Distinguished Personnel Achievement Medals from NASA, one for the successful formulation of the Grail mission to the Moon, 2012, and the second for the successful formulation and commissioning of the InSight lander on Mars, 2019. Following Leon's presentation on the technology, Dan Broderick, manager of the Office of Technology Transfer at JPL, will be giving a short presentation on how JPL licenses technology to outside organizations. Before we get started, I'd like to point out that your microphones will be muted throughout this presentation. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box in the lower right corner of your screen, and we will answer them during the Q&A session at the end. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, Leon.
Thank you, Debbie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Debbie, for the wonderful and kind introduction, and thank you, Sean, for inviting Dan Broderick and myself to this event. It's my pleasure to tell you more about the Vital NASA JPL ventilator, and also it's my honor here to represent the whole team of this project. So Debbie did give a very nice introduction of my career at JPL. I've been there for 31 years this month, and it's been a wonderful career for me. I graduated from UCLA in '89 and have been there ever since. And as you can imagine, this last effort, last 6 months, is something that has not been planned before. It's an addition to the general career that I've had at JPL in terms of space exploration, technology development, and so on. Moving to the next slide, if I can get this to move. Oh. So let me just see. So the next slide introduces the Vital leadership team. As you'll see, the actual team is quite large. A lot of people worked on this project. But I wanted to give credit to the leadership team of the Vital project, which I will actually introduce throughout the discussion today. But I'm currently the project manager for this project, taking over several months ago from Roger Gibbs. Roger and I worked the leadership of this project for many months now, and you see other people here that I will mention throughout the presentation. They've all had exceptional leadership roles on this project, and I will recognize them during the presentation. So what I will discuss with you today is what I hope will be quite exciting and interesting to you. It is a true story, so to speak, and it began in mid-March with 2 of our JPL engineers, David Van Buren and Rob Manning, somewhat by chance running into each other in the cafeteria discussing the most recent crisis in the fight against COVID-19. And the idea arose to, why can't JPL do something? Why can't we help? And this sparked an initiative. David Van Buren reached out to me I reached out to my boss, Dave Gallagher, and we kicked off the following Monday on March 16th. We kicked off this whole project, which I'll describe in more detail. But in summary, within only 37 or 40 days, we've had FDA approval for the technology that we developed for two new ventilator designs, and you'll see more details beyond that. We've now licensed this technology to close to 30 different companies around the world, and both Dan Broderick and I will address that. So it's been a crazy, fast-paced development from a whiteboard to FDA approval for emergency use authorization. And today we'll describe some of the details behind that journey. What I'd like to share with you is a little bit the situation that occurred just before or just when we embarked on this idea. And this graph notionally describes the need for the ventilators at that time. You may recall in March, early March, and certainly there were lots of reports in the media, in the news, and especially in Europe, that the surge in the number of COVID-19 patients and their requirement for ventilators was just overwhelming. It was overwhelming hospitals and so on. So there was clearly a need for ventilators, and the whole stockpile was not sufficient in the U.S. to handle that surge. What we looked into a little bit more is how do you manage that surge, and if there is a clear differentiation from the ventilators that are needed in the ICU versus the ventilators that are needed that would be still high-end ventilators, but more ventilators that would be used on the majority of the population that is not necessarily in the ICU condition. And we worked together with our outside counsel, with doctors and so on, to identify this niche product, what's shown here as the 80%. So these are not the ultra-high-end ventilators that would be required and used in the ICU. And those are typically the ventilators that are used to deal with patients who are suffering from multiple symptoms, not only respiratory COVID-related, but there could be kidney failure, there could be heart failure, there could be many, many other factors that are happening all at the same time. And yet there was a need for lower-end ventilators that could specifically treat COVID patients, not necessarily patients who are extremely sick, and that's where this product, Vital, was targeted. In summary, the intended target patient is an adult patient over 18 years old with a minimum body weight of 50 kilograms. The patient is sedated and intubated, relatively stable vital signs, and so the patient is on a continuous therapeutic regimen and predominantly stable and not suffering from multiple situations, medical situations, and can be treated with a fairly quite capable ventilator, but not a ventilator that would be used in a much more serious situation. The patient does or can exhibit spontaneous breathing, which is another requirement that was pretty important in the design of the ventilator. Right from the beginning, one of our lead team members, Stacy Boland, was dedicated to both two aspects of the design. One is the operational use, and one is the interface to the whole medical community, the operational use from a trained registered nurse or operator in the field. And so these are both areas that we are not experts in, but she did a phenomenal job in both designing the human aspect or how the operational aspect of the ventilator and how it will be used in the field. You see here at the bottom a very important statement. The mode of operation for this ventilator is what we call volume targeted, pressure limited, and time limited. This is quite an important statement. You will see it in multiple occasions. And this is something that when we worked with the FDA and with hospitals, it was very important to communicate because doctors and trained operators of the ventilator really need to understand what is the mode of operation of the ventilator. And we ran into this question and topic repeatedly. I wanted to show some specifications of the ventilator. The ventilator is used to mix hospital-grade oxygen with air, with ambient air, and you have to be able to fine-tune that ratio, and these are some of the parameters. It has to be able to mix up to 100% pure oxygen. It has to have a specific positive and expiratory pressure. This is an important parameter. This is the pressure as the patient exhales, and the backup rate is also listed here. The tidal volume is the total volume that is delivered in one breath to the patient, and the size and weight of the ventilator is shown here. So it's a pretty reasonably small, moderately sized ventilator, and you see a picture here of one of the ventilators that we designed. We ended up picking and designing two different ventilators, and I'll go through this in a little bit more detail. Why not one? Why two different, fairly similar but slightly different ventilator designs? One we refer to as the pneumatic ventilator, and the other one to a compressor ventilator. And I'll describe briefly what each one of these does. So a pneumatic ventilator basically takes oxygen and air from a hospital resource, meaning that it provides both oxygen and air under pressure, 50 psi nominal pressure. So this pneumatic ventilator is one that doesn't have an internal engine or internal motor or blower. It simply transduces the pressure coming from the hospital resource, a wall-mounted resource of both oxygen and air, which typically exists in most hospitals. However, when we talk to physicians, when we talk to hospitals, at the time we were in touch with Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City, they were setting up large tent facilities in Central Park. And similar things were happening at different gyms, stadiums, outdoor facilities, and so on, where pressurized air was not available. So you have to generate have a ventilator that actually generates pressurized air. So that would be the compressor unit. The pneumatic would be certainly applicable to places where you have both oxygen and air under 50 psi pressure from tanks, and the compressor only requires oxygen under pressure, which typically is available in existing bottled containers and so on. Most of the design, other than that one detail between the pneumatic and the compressor design, are identical in terms of most of its parts, except for the internal portion that deals with the source and the pressure inside the ventilator. I'd like to go into some detail, not a lot of detail, but the pneumatic design, just like I described here, shows on the top. You have pressurized oxygen and air, and it's coming into two different pressure chambers, one we call the low pressure and the high pressure. And the high pressure is for inhaling at the high, the peak inspiratory pressure that needs to be set with a knob on the top of the ventilator. And the low pressure is the peak, or the positive end expiratory pressure. That's when you exhale, what that end pressure is to the lungs. And those two have to be managed. They are set by the operator, depending on the state of the patient, and the operator gets instructions, and the nurse, and sets those two knobs. And then the intent is for the patient to be in that controlled mode for could be an extended amount of time. The system, the pneumatic system and the compressor system, does detect when a patient voluntarily starts breathing and allows for the patient assist mode to take over. So this is a very simple schematic block diagram of the pneumatic design. The compressor design has a motor. It has a blower, and it takes in ambient air from the ambient. Oxygen is again flowing in under pressure, and then it's one input plenum that is used to manage both the low and the high pressure that the patient needs, both inhaling and exhaling. So it's one pressurized chamber that is used for both situations. So the control is a little bit more complicated. The two pressure chambers are not disjoint, they're one, and the pressure needs to switch between the high and the low. So somewhat of the control electronics is a little bit more complicated, but still works very nicely. Now let me show you the whole team. This is a team that has 90% of the people working from home. This was literally a 24/7 activity. When we started on March 16, which was the official date and of the beginning, we really did not have a single weekend or a single day that was not a full working day, and at times we clocked 15, 16 hours a day. There was genuinely a sense of urgency and a need to help society, help the U.S., help the world in this effort. So there was an adrenaline rush, an exuberance, just a call to duty that was pretty intense and lasted for at least about 2 months, I would say, and then we were clearly directed to slow down and transition into more of a steady state mode as we license the technology to the world. I wanted to share with this audience a little bit about the strategy. My day job and our strategic partnerships, and I work closely with Dave Gallagher at JPL on strategic integration and strategic planning. And so I wanted to reflect back. I don't want to give the impression that from day one we had a perfectly well thought out strategy. But looking back at how we dealt with the urgency and the situation, I compiled this list of strategic elements that I think are interesting to share with this community. First of all, we're not medical experts. So we were jumping into a field for which we had great talent in terms of engineering, great energy, great facilities. So we had a lot of facilities available to us, almost infinite resources in terms of laboratories and people who were just volunteering left and right to help out. But we were not medical experts. We knew that very well, so we were very eager to seek advice from the beginning. We're talking about medical doctors. You'll see more of them. We immediately, through Caltech, reached out to Medtronic, which is a partner with Caltech, and we got tremendous support from Medtronic and other medical institutions. We reached out to other government agencies, as you'll see in a minute, and so on. So we looked out, we sought expertise that we did not have quite eagerly. We were very much in a rapid design and rapid prototyping mode. We partnered with industry. We worked very closely with the FDA from day 3, not day 1, but between day 1 and day 3, we made a strategic decision that anything we build has to have FDA approval. This was quite a differentiator between what we were doing and some of the other university efforts, open source efforts. We knew that we wanted to have something that would have FDA approval. We actually reached out to hospitals and asked them, would they build or would they use something, a device that was not approved by the FDA, and the answer is clearly no. So we decided on day 3 to do that, and we reached out to FDA and got their support from the beginning, which was very, very important and critical. Where possible, we defaulted to what JPL did very well. And so once we defined the requirements, which is specified in a specific form, then requirements flow down. Implementing those requirements, we have standard processes. We have documentation and so on. Also part of our way of doing business is to have frequent peer reviews. We had, in a week or two, we had peer reviews almost every other day. Technical, medical, regulatory, manufacturing, supply chain. These were all peer reviews where we brought in people from outside, from inside, and we prepared for these peer reviews relentlessly, and those were very, very important in getting to the right design. We knew also that we had no real experience in manufacturing. It's not our bread and butter. We build one or two of things. So we brought in consultants, advisors from outside, who some of them volunteered to just help us with design for manufacturing. Supply chain was critical. We decided from the beginning not to interfere with legacy manufacturers of ventilators. So all the parts were sourced from non-medical device suppliers in the ventilator business, and yet were qualified manufacturers. They could provide volume components, and they could provide parts that were compatible with getting FDA approval. And then finally, the topic of today is there was a critical decision point between Roger Gibbs and myself to decide not to issue a contract to go to technology licensing. And that was a critical decision. At that point, we reached out to Caltech and to Dan Broderick and others, saying we want to do a rapid transition to industry. How do we do that, and how do we do it quickly? Our medical advisors, just to go through some of these points, I want to recognize Dr. Michael Gurovich from Huntington Hospital in Pasadena, and in particular Dr. Matt Levin from Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. Dr. Gurovich is standing looking over one of our mobile robots, and Dr. Matt Levin was often calling into our lab and working with Dr. Gurovich. And then also you see in the background to the right, standing, you see Mike Johnson, but just behind him you see Stacy Boland on the second mobile robot. And this is how we, with all the COVID restrictions, how we networked across the country with various people calling into our laboratory as needed through these remote robots. I mentioned rapid design and prototype. This was clearly something that we were skilled at, and we had the facilities. And both prototypes, both ventilators, were breadboarded in less than 2 weeks. So from the whiteboard to a schematic design and a breadboard, we were looking at less than 2 weeks from concept to a working breadboard. This is quite incredible and worth mentioning that it was essential for the project. Now, not every startup company or every laboratory has the resources that JPL has. We were able to kind of steal and beg and borrow from everywhere and create our own lab space and put things to work. What you see here is that we also borrowed a high-fidelity lung simulator from some of our neighboring hospitals from Huntington and Santa Monica. We actually did not have the funds to buy a high-fidelity lung simulator, which can cost up to $70,000 or so. So we borrowed, we took one on loan and connected it into our high-fidelity simulation test bed. I want to also recognize Michelle Easter, shown here, who was in charge of the test bed. And this was a really excellent decision by the project leadership to really put one person in charge of the test bed. The test bed had a bunch of ins and outs, onboarding and offboarding. We had to work very closely on the design and the prototyping, going back and forth, picking a motor for the compressor. It doesn't work, pick something else. It doesn't work, and so on. So having a single focus on maintaining the fidelity and the of the test bed was very, very critical. That test bed interfaced very closely. In this case, you're seeing this fellow on the right with a NASA shirt is Arby Parapetian. He was leading the production team. The production team and the design team were closely connected and yet had to work in parallel. The production team had to source the supply chain for all the components that were going into the prototype. And many times there was not a good match. There was something in the prototype that could not be built on the scale or on the timeline that would be available by the production team, or vice versa. So there has to be a clear overlap between what works in the prototype and what can be manufactured in high volume and get regulatory approval, whether it's an oxygen sensor or the electronics and so on. So we have to go back and forth. The team had to work very closely to find that compatibility between manufacturability and production and compatibility with medical devices, and it works and meets the specification in a prototype test bed. And those had to work in parallel, and they had to meet. And that was quite a challenge. So Arby and his team did a phenomenal job. In parallel to that, we brought in our JPL studio. The JPL studio is a collection of brilliant, very talented individuals who have a industrial design background. Many of them from the Pasadena School of Design, locally here. And they are the artists. They are the human-machine interface experts. And they, we would sketch out to them, Stacy would sketch out what are the indicators that the medical profession or the medical personnel want to see, and then the designers would go back and say, well, this is what we need to put in and how and so on. They have to make it visually appealing, and yet we don't have months to do this. We have only days and weeks. So we have to make it functional, effective, and yet somewhat, I would say, attractive for use. And so the studio did a phenomenal job of providing that kind of utility and value to the project. Finally, we knew from the beginning that even before we go to the FDA for approval, we need to get a validation of our design from institutions that carry the weight in the medical profession. So through some personal ties, I am closely friends with one of the leaders at Mount Sinai Hospital, Dr. Scott Friedman. He introduced us to the president of Mount Sinai, Dr. David Rich, and they volunteered Dr. Matt Levin, who became our friend and was involved in all our peer reviews. So we shipped this prototype to Mount Sinai. They validated the design with their high-fidelity lung simulator and really gave us an enthusiastic thumbs up on the actual prototype design. We were very happy with that, but we also wanted a second validation, so we reached out to Dr. Tisha Wang at the Ronald Reagan Medical Center here in Los Angeles. They actually validated the compressor design, which after that we also sent to Mount Sinai again for them to validate the compressor design as well. So after getting good validation from both Mount Sinai and UCLA, then we submitted the design to the FDA for EUA approval, emergency use, and to our tremendous surprise, there was a back and forth, there were many questions and so on, but the FDA gave us approval for both in a record amount of time, turning this around in a matter of a few days only. In the case of the regulatory approval process, Chris Yanker and his team did a phenomenal job. Again, we're not experts in medical devices. We've never obtained FDA approval. And we also had to convince the FDA that our process of getting FDA approval at JPL and then licensing this to industry for manufacturing is a two-step process that the FDA can work with, and they did. So the ultimate step is we get the FDA approval, we license it to industry. Industry, if it's in the U.S., they need to reapply for the EUA approval at the FDA. But given if the design is more or less the same as what we built, it's a very rapid process to get that FDA approval. And if it's not the same, if there's some updates and changes, only those deltas will be reviewed by the FDA, and again, ensuring a rapid process of approval, which many of the U.S. licensees are currently in that stage right now. Before I transition to Dan Broderick for some more details, the process of licensing today, I consider is still ongoing, and I consider a tremendous success in the sense that we've licensed to close to 30 companies across the world. You'll see some of that detail from Dan Broderick. 8 companies in the U.S., 21 around the world, including Brazil, India, and many others. And that was done through a very well-defined process, as you'll hear, and more is available on this website. But in doing so, we actually reached out to the world. We were actually very fortunate that in a few weeks before this, we actually demonstrated or shown this ventilator prototype. NASA had an opportunity to showcase how NASA is supporting the COVID crisis with a show and tell in the White House. So we actually were able to show this ventilator to the President of the United States, and this got some really good media attention, even beyond what NASA would normally do. And with that media attention, a lot of companies and countries across the world expressed immediate interest in at least considering to license this design. So I'm listing here the people who were brought in to facilitate the whole process. We had our Office of General Counsel involved, Chantal Morgan DePuzzo, Moral Garib, and Mary Beth Campbell, Rafael Martinez at JPL, Sarah and Carrie, and then Dan Broderick was leading this effort from a JPL point of view, and you'll hear from him shortly. I will just conclude is that what we also did was we built a dozen prototypes, fully functional prototypes, and to whoever requested the prototype, we shipped it for their local testing and becoming familiar with the design. This is one of our licensee in India at Bharat Forge. They actually were extremely capable of retrieving and fully testing the prototype in their facility and did an outstanding job. And then I want to give a lot of credit to the Brazilian team. They actually teamed up together. These are 2 different licensees, Sinai Cimatec and Russer. Sinai Cimatec is more of a research and development, like a federal facility, and Russer is a manufacturing facility. So they've teamed up, and in record time, they were able to reproduce our ventilator design. You see their prototype here on the left. And actually, they were able to get their regulatory approval through ANVISA, which is their regulatory FDA organization. And they were able to also do EMI, EMC testing and improve on our design in both EMI, EMC susceptibility and in some of the software improvements, which is exactly what we wanted to see. We wanted to license this technology. We wanted to bring out the limitations of what we were not yet able to complete, and we had a whole list of things that what we recommend the licensee improve on, and they actually took that and went even further. And certainly they're very eager and ready to license to manufacture and sell these, and I believe they already have booked a business for these ventilators. So with that, Debbie and Sean, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I hope I stayed within reasonable schedule. So until Dan kicks in or calls in or is heard, should I carry the ball forward?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
So we'll just, as soon as we hear Dan's voice, I'll let him jump in. But a lot of the information that Dan would present is actually available online. If you go to this website, medical engineering or medeng.jpl.nasa.gov/COVID-19 ventilator registration, you'll see a wealth of information about the actual ventilator. So what's important to mention here is that this whole process that we went through was not at all clear to us that we were going to be doing this. It was really kind of a decision point. Originally, we thought we were going to contract out and select a manufacturing partner ourselves. And in doing that, we were getting a lot of support from NASA, from Department of Homeland Security, from FEMA, from Human Health Services. And at a very important juncture, we decided the best way to go forward is through licensing. And the reason is that we actually did not have the funding from FEMA or Department of Homeland Security. At some point, NASA was on the verge of getting that fully set up through other government agencies. And as we did not have that fully in hand, we decided that we were going to license this to industry. And so you see that the process we're going through is actually a standard licensing process. It's just been opened up on a much, much larger scale. And Dan Broderick and his team deal with this kind of a licensing process on a regular basis. What we have to kind of impose on this process is to scale to much higher degrees. So the license actually is a time to be consistent and take place during the pandemic. So it's during the pandemic as declared by the World Health Organization, and it's limited to October 1st, 2024, whichever comes earlier. Post that time period or post the pandemic, the license can be renegotiated to be more of a fee-based license. I did not mention it. I'm sure Dan would have done this a better job. Currently, there is no fee for licensing. It's a totally free licensing agreement between Caltech and the licensee. It is a license to commercialize. It does require a quarterly reporting of how that is moving forward. And there are no developmental or commercial sale milestone dates or numbers, but we do require that any such sales or numbers be reported on a quarterly basis. The licensing is actually obtained through a control process, and it's through a password-protected website. And this website, once you are a licensee, is what we have is a tremendous amount of information. It is not only the bill of materials, but it's all the instructions for how to manufacture. We even have videos, we have animations, we have renderings, 3D CAD drawings, even the software is documented in state charts. It does come with what we call Tier 1 software. It comes with operational instructions. All the FDA documents are also included, and we as a team provide limited technical support. Since this is a major topic of this meeting, I can tell you that we've received extremely positive feedback from the licensees that they've never seen this scale of download of information and detailed documentation of everything that was done. So just judging by how quickly the Brazilian team went from licensing or downloading data to building the prototype, it was in a matter of a month or so that they were they had their own built prototype, which was pretty incredible. So there are a few constraints there are a few issues that need to be considered, and that is the part of the deal that we negotiated with the FDA. In other words, you are not allowed to just license this from Caltech, build it, validate the functionality, and then sell it in the U.S. You have to go back to the FDA and provide evidence that the technology has been maintained and that you can carry that EUA approval forward. In the country where, outside the U.S., where this is to be sold, you have to obtain local regulatory approval. So this is one step shy of having only, just build and sell. You have to build, and still get the FDA approval, which is either a pro forma or a small step to be done. And then post the pandemic, if you want to use the same ventilator, you have to get 510K FDA approval once the EUA is no longer available. We provided to the licensee a pretty long list of all the things that need to be done in addition to all the work that we've done. Some have to do with oxygen compatibility, some have to do with EMI, EMC testing, and a lot of features that we thought we would improve on, we documented and provided to the licensees. I think I mentioned this about the FDA approval, that it is the responsibility of the licensee. I also want to share an interesting detail that especially both Dan and our Office of General Counsel Representative Chantal were critical in deciding. The license stipulates that if you find any improvement that is of a patient critical nature, if you find a fatal flaw, if you find something that needs to change, you are on a goodwill basis, honor basis, asked to report that, and then that would be shared with all other licensees. If you do some improvements just to make the product better design, a better improvement on software, then that is up to you at your discretion whether you want to share or not. And the licensees have generally accepted that. Here's our lead design engineer, Mike Johnson, with a nice family portrait of all 12 of our ventilators, pneumatic and compressor, and they have been shipped all over the world, one in India, Brazil, and currently one in Mexico. We've had one in Canada, and they're going all over the world and kind of helping the licensees understand better how to use them and so on. These are some of Dan's lessons learned and so on. So we went through a pretty rigorous process of selection. What is interesting here is that none of the large legacy manufacturers applied for the license. This is quite understandable. For many of the licensees, many of them have medical experience, but not with ventilators necessarily. And so for many of them, this was an opportunity to go into a new product and so on. So it was a big deal for smaller companies in the U.S. to get this technology transfer and then make something good out of it. Internationally, it was quite the opposite. Internationally, this was an opportunity for fairly big companies, as listed here, greater than 500 employees. Listed here is also that we did not get many proposals from Europe. There's one Portuguese company, and you can read this. The rest of this is pretty interesting. That just in my experience, at least the scale at which this was managed was something that we haven't seen before at Caltech. So looking ahead, as I mentioned, we're very, very excited to see this product actually be used in the fields. We're shortly a little bit short of that time. We expect that to happen within the next month or so. As I mentioned, in Brazil, they already received regulatory approval. They're about to get that in India, and we anticipate that this will be used in the field within the next few weeks, maybe a month or two. And if you have any further questions on the technology transfer process and experience, you can reach out to Dan Broderick. So, Debbie, this is the best I can do for Dan, unless he's back online.
Okay, that's all the time we have for today. If you have any additional questions, then please feel free to submit them to the email address at the very bottom of the screen, and we'll be sure to follow up with answers to those as well. Once again, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And thanks so much, Leon, for your participation.
Thank you all, and if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to me.